Father Mark signing on, continuing the course on medieval church history. Picking up where we left off last time, going through the unit on the 12th century. We begin with the establishment of a new military religious order, the Knights of Santiago, the Knights of St. James, established in the year 1158 in Spain. So they were directed against Islam, but not in the Holy Land. As remember, in an earlier lecture, we covered the conquest of much of the Iberian Peninsula by Islam, beginning in the year 711. So the Knights of Santiago can be seen as part of the larger Reconquista, when the Spanish and Portuguese waged war to drive Islam out of the peninsula, which ended up taking 7 centuries, was finally accomplished in January of 1492. So the Knights of St. James were a part of that. It was unique up to that time in that it allowed the fully professed to marry, whereas the previous orders we covered only allowed their tertiaries to marry. Their particular mission was like the Templars in the Holy Land, protecting pilgrims going to the shrines, but in this case it was in Spain. So their mission was to protect pilgrims on the road to Compostela in northwest Spain, which was venerated for holding the relics of St. James. Unlike the contemporary orders, Spanish orders, the Knights of Calatrava and Knights of Alcantara, which followed a fairly severe adaptation of the Cistercian rule. The Knights of Santiago adopted the milder rule of the canons of St. Augustine. From the beginning, they had both a hospitaller as well as a military ministry. Their habit was white with a red cross, but it was shaped differently than the Templar red cross. In that the Knights of Santiago, their cross, the main beam, the vertical beam, the bottom part came to a point, to a sword, like a sword point, and then the rest had the shape of the fleur de lis on the what would be on the hilt and on the arms. The knights wore the cross stamped both on their cape as well as on the tabard, like the habit that went over their armor. The cross had a scallop at the center, a seashell, which is you find in art of the period of even on vestments. The shell is like we have no abiding home. That we have, just like like the shell is just tossed around on the ocean. So we also, this is not our home. We're just passing through. Okay, so moving on with papal history. 6 days after the death of Pope Hadrian IV at Anagni, remember, still couldn't get back into Rome, the cardinal priest of San Marco, who had been the chancellor to the late Pope Hadrian IV, accepted election as the 170th pope, taking the name Alexander III. He reigned for 21 years and 11 months. Though, because of the problems we already covered, he spent very little of that time in the city of Rome. Born in the year 1105 in Siena, Tuscany, baptized Rolando of the House of Bandinelli. He studied law and theology at the University of Bologna. In October of 1150, Pope Eugenius III appointed him cardinal deacon of Saints Cosmas and Damian. 3 years later, he was elevated, became a cardinal priest and papal chancellor. Cardinals employed by Barbarossa, the German Emperor Frederick I, Hohenstaufen, held a rival election and chose the first of 4 anti-popes to plague Alexander's pontificate. And last time we covered the reasons for Barbarossa's antipathy and mistrust toward the Holy See. Alexander's pontificate was largely itinerant, wandering throughout Italy and France, in the course of which he survived and escaped. He was actually kidnapped, but he survived that and escaped. 1 year after his election, the third medieval university came into existence. We covered already Salerno. The first began as a medical school and then expanded. The second, Bologna, started as a law school and then expanded to be a university. The third was the University, the University of Paris, the year 1160. It was a very different origin from the previous two. It represented a union of 4 pre-existing smaller schools which banded together for the purpose of mutual protection and support. They applied for a royal charter as an independent corporation. The charter was granted by King Louis VII of France, whom we covered last time on the misbegotten Second Crusade. This step, applying for a royal charter, is essential in understanding how and why universities ultimately turned against the church until they've become the sad, pitiful, lost things that they are now, vectors of every form of doubt and dehumanization and infantilization that they are now. 3 of the 4 schools that were antecedent to the University of Paris were of church origin. One, we've already visited, the Abbey of St. Victor, founded by William of Champeaux, or Shampoo, if you prefer. Second was the Abbey School of St. Genevieve. St. Genevieve was one of the patron saints of Paris. We met her earlier in the course in the Merovingian period. Third, a place we've already visited, the Cathedral School of Notre Dame in Paris. There we met Peter Lombard, as well as Peter Abelard, and his unfortunate dalliance with Eloise. While the fourth of the antecedent schools was of secular origin. It was the palace school, meaning the royal school in Paris, sponsored by the kings of France, to train their own bureaucrats, meaning training laymen in literacy and law, so that the kings could have bureaucrats who did not have a previous loyalty to the church. Since the four schools came from a monastic, clerical, as well as secular origins, when they come together, they have the problem of, well, which organization are we going to adopt? So as we covered through the course, monastic schools, cathedral schools, they had very different structures. So these refused, the two abbey schools, the cathedral school and the secular school, refused to adopt any one of the other forms of governance. Like the two abbey schools refused to follow the rule of Saint Chrodegon, which was the secular or the cathedral school origin that we covered earlier, whereas the cathedral school and the royal school refused to follow the rule of Saint Benedict, as they said, okay, we're not monks, and it went on like that. And it's just pride, of course, it's pride and envy, because none of them their pride would not allow them to place any of the others above them. And those two, the pride and envy, generated sufficient emotion to prevent the exercise of prudence and the virtue of humility. So right at the beginning, you have that, that taint, that poison at this, early in the university movement. So by necessity, they adopted a completely different form of governance, the guild format. The guild governance became the basis for the University of Paris governance. And it was a model that already existed at the medical school at Salerno and the law school at Bologna, with one important difference here. Salerno and Bologna were both established as schools for particular trades, medicine and law. And then other departments of the university just accreted around that core. But initially they had a very clear telos, a very clear goal and a purpose for existing. Whereas the University of Paris not only had these four antecedent schools, when it came together, it was four separate faculties. A faculty of medicine, a faculty of law, a faculty, what they call then the arts, but I suppose we'd say today the humanities for that, and a faculty of theology. The creation of the University of Paris with four separate faculties introduced the concept of a school of higher learning apart from the life of the church, configuring theology as a professional discipline that could be studied without being a cleric or a monk. Analogous studying theology as a profession, just like medicine or law. So when the universities were created, the guild of the guild structure was transposed onto the university, which meant that there was a university hierarchy, as like a guild, but instead of apprentice, journeyman, master, as with the guild, in the university, it would be student, bachelor, licentiate, master, doctor. So some of those terms don't mean the same thing today as they did then. So student comes from the Latin, the verb in the infinitive studiare just means to study. So a person who's, like for a time, their existence is just studying. The second level up, the bachelor, this is one that doesn't mean the same thing as today. The original, the origin, the etymology is from the Latin word baccalaris, which means a helper. So it would be a student who had put some time in and could therefore be of help. Like I suppose today would say the TA, the teaching assistant, would be a helper, but still not finished his studies. The third level up, the licentiate. It's from the Latin licere, meaning to be allowed. Obviously the same origin as the word license. So one who had reached that point of licentiate meant that person could teach, that person was authorized to teach in that particular discipline. The next level up, the master, it's from the Latin magister, which means chief, in the sense of one in authority. So it's above in the sense the licentiate in that it was a person of a higher rank than the licentiate. So not just licensed to teach, but also considered a master of that discipline. And remember, for that, to go from the licentiate to the magister, they had to do a commentary, public commentary, and defend their commentary on the sentences of Peter Abelard. We covered that earlier. And the highest level, the doctor, that certainly doesn't mean the same thing it does today. It's from the Latin, the verb in the infinitive docere, meaning to teach. So what about a physician? So, we call that. So the word used for physician in Latin was medicus, derived from the Latin verb medere, meaning to heal. So the medicus was the healer, whereas the doctor had reached the summit of the academic university hierarchy. University leadership, as again following the guild precedent, university leadership was elected by its members, not all of them, but master and above, magister and above. And they would form the Senate, the University Senate. Internal procedures for advancement were also determined in this way. Like, what does it take to go from being a student to a bachelor, from a bachelor to a licentiate, from licentiate to magister, magister to doctor, so that this university senate would decide all of that. And they would decide on the advanced degrees. So a person defending their commentary on Peter Lombard's sentences, that would have to be done publicly in front of everyone, but the ones who would finally decide would be the university senate. Did a licentiate defend this sufficiently to be considered a magister, a master of the subject? When the university as a guild or social corporation wished to formulate any other internal procedures, like, are we going to buy a new building, or are we going to sell a building, or we're going to open another faculty, we're going to add another faculty or not, any those kind of procedures apart from strictly academic decisions, or once a university had become prominent enough to make public statements on the issues of the day, then it would be decided in the same way. The issue would be presented before the university senate. It would be voted on by the senate, and then, depending on what the vote was, it could be distributed for consideration by the whole university body, the corpus, the whole body of the university. Only after it was approved through a vote of the university body did a particular procedure or a particular public position on an issue become binding on everyone at the university. Likewise, if the university chancellor, which would be president in our terms, put forward a plan of action, it only became binding on the members of the university corporation if it was accepted through a vote of the university body. Okay, let that sink in. Now, consider the implications for church history and theology. Scholars, professional academics in universities, by definition, are the class of society who are going to research and write their opinions on all issues of the day, including theological issues. It was natural that these scholars would look at the world and the issues they studied through the prism of their own lived experience as members of a university body shaped by guild procedures, not by obedience to the church. Like the two antecedent abbey schools, they would be bound by obedience to the abbot of those monasteries, or the cathedral school would be bound ultimately by the decision of the Bishop of Paris. But in this case, no, it's a guild. So when turning their attention to the nature of the church, ecclesiology is the theology of the church, they automatically compared what existed in the church, the hierarchical top-down authority structure, command structure. They compared that to what they knew from their experience, their guild experience in the university, and judged their system in which the members had input in the decisions that would ultimately bind them. They judged that as being a superior system to the existing hierarchical command structure of the church, which was based on obedience, not democracy. Okay, let that sink in. From this, all these factors, from this developed a school of thought among some scholars at some universities that the social corporation model of the guild university should be followed by the universal church, with members of the church, meaning the baptized, having a vote, having a say on who should advance to higher positions, like what priests should become pastors, what pastors should become bishops, what bishops should become archbishops, what archbishops should become cardinals, which cardinals should become pope. As well, that the members of the church, the baptized, should also, according to this line of thought, have some kind of voting or some kind of say or input in approving the church teachings and the church discipline that would bind them as members of the church. This was the origin of a later heresy called Richerism, named for Edmund Richer, R-I-C-H-E-R. He was on the faculty of the University of Paris and argued for democracy, a form of democracy to replace church hierarchy. Right? Now, having already decided that this was the ideal to be pursued, those who subscribed to this kind of ecclesiology then searched through history, for precedents that they could use to justify their position. So this is the fallacy of the confirmation bias. So they already decided what was right. Then they're looking through history to see, okay, we can use this and kind of rephrase this and say, oh yes, 1,000 years ago, this is a precedent. So they believe they found such precedents in history for the early councils and provincial synods of antiquity, some of which we covered in the patristics course. This line of reasoning led to yet another heresy, distinct from Richerism, but connected to it in a way, and that is the heresy of conciliarism. The assertion that church councils had superior authority to the Pope and could even remove a Pope. Whereas just authentic church teaching, is that a council is only a council if it is in union with the Pope and the bishops, just like Peter and the apostles. Like it's only binding if all of them are there, not 11 apostles against Peter, or in this case the bishops against the Pope, and that's based on the biblical precedent in Acts of the Apostles chapter 15, the first church council, the Council of Jerusalem, where they got together to decide a theological issue. What was going to be the role of the Mosaic law, the old Sinai covenant, in the new covenant of Christ? How much of it was going to be binding? And again, we covered that in patristics, so that's how they made their decision. And both of these, Richerism and conciliarism, are going to be, between them is going to develop another ecclesiology, which is, I guess, the easiest way to call it. It's an anachronistic term, but it'd be the national church ecclesiology. Because nation states, it's really that this, in the 12th century, it's too early to talk about nation states in the way that we use that term now. But it's kind of the origin, just the idea that the hierarchy in a particular country should control the church in that country, and just honor the Pope as a spiritual figurehead. So again, at the University of Paris, so it's called Gallicanism, because it was first, this idea was first proposed in France, and the ancient name for France was Gaul, so Gallicanism. All right, so keep all this in mind. All of these heresies were invented and promoted in the University of Paris, and then from there, because of the prestige of that university, and because so many scholars who studied there ended up teaching in other universities to make a living, these ideas spread, and they became sort of ambient in the milieu, the intellectual and theological milieu of the high medieval period, and are going to cause a great deal of problems for the church, and are among the many contributing factors to the Protestant movement of the 16th century. So remember, nothing just happens. Okay, some of this we'll cover in this course, develop in this course. Some would be in the next course. So that's in terms of governance. But in terms of teaching, it is a university, so how do they teach? This is the scholastic method, or the method of the schoolmen. The scholastic method, though it does not at first appear to be the case, hear me out, was rooted in the method of instruction of craft guilds. The scholastic method was in three parts. First part, the exposition. That would be the lectio in Latin, or just the lecture. That this consisted of defining terms, a division of whatever the subject is into manageable units, manageable categories, preliminary reasoning. So not only defining terms, but defining, what are our axioms, what are our a priori assumptions, or if we have any, how do we judge them? Is our line of reasoning going to be inductive or deductive, or some combination of both? Now, this was usually based, the exposition was usually based on authoritative texts. This is the beginning of the method. So it's also a way to introduce the students to their references, the reference sources. The Bible for theology, the church fathers. For grammar would be Priscian and Donatus. Those dated from the Roman period, ancient Roman period, but had survived. For rhetoric, public speaking, the authoritative text would be Cicero. For law would be the Code of Justinian. For medicine would be, at least what survived, are the writings of Galen and Hippocrates. For philosophy, Plato, at least what survived, what they had access to, are Plato and Aristotle. Second, the disputation, or the debate. This is the dialectic. We talked about the dialectic earlier in the course. So this consisted of presenting the pro et contra, the for and against, of various interpretations of what was studied in the exposition. And so this is not only forcing the student to read those authoritative texts more closely, but also to think it through and to express it rhetorically and defend it. So you're also working on honing that reasoning skill and your verbal presentation skills and your confidence, and so it's all part of the learning process. I say Cicero and the Hortensius meant this. Another one would say sed contra, but to the contrary. I assert that Cicero actually meant this. And then the magister listening to this, well, okay, defend your positions. And, do it in front of the, so that's all part of the learning. Third, the determination, or the resolution. This consisted of the master, the magister, or the doctor, summarizing his own resolution to whatever the questions raised, and explaining his reasonings. A mature teacher, meaning one who just did this year after year after year, over the years you build up stuff, build up notes. A mature teacher would often collect the results of all of his own work and have it copied and distributed as a summa, a summary of the particular discipline. And in time, this could be a text in the hands of his successors, his students, and then later those who would follow after him. There were also another two types, a genre of writing in scholasticism. One was the questiones disputate, obviously disputed questions. So these were special treatises written on the more difficult or more important topics. And as the name implied, it followed the method of debate, the pro et contra, the for and against, prevalent in the schools. So this would be like a monograph. We think of it as an essay, an argumentative essay, in the sense that it's an essay putting forward and defending a particular position. And another genre of scholastic writing is called the quod libeta, which doesn't translate easily. It means whatsoever you please, or whatsoever, just whatsoever. The you please is understood, so whatsoever, or various. So this would be, we would call this miscellaneous. So it's just a collection of miscellaneous topics in the form of answers put to questions by students, or in the form of letters. So they're questions, like shorter answers, miscellaneous shorter answers that don't merit a full essay, but are still interesting. The questions came up, and it's questions that would come up. So miscellaneous specific special topics. That would be the quod libida. Okay, so that university came together in Paris in 1162. Excuse me, 1160. Now we move 2 years forward. In 1162, beginning in Andalusia, which was the Islamic part of the Iberian Peninsula of Spain, a Sunni Muslim commentator on Aristotle began publishing his commentaries on Aristotle. This guy's his Islamic name was Ahmed bin Rushd, but that in medieval Latin that's contracted into Averroes. Averroes. Aquinas, in the Summa, his Summa Theologica, refers to him as the commentator. Whenever you see the commentator, that means Averroes. He was born, Averroes was born into a legal family, prominent judges. Now remember that this is Islamic judges, so that's it. And they didn't have that distinction between the secular law and the religious law. So they're judges, they're scholars of the law. It was just, the whole structure of life. Whereas Averroes took a different path. He decided to become a physician by profession. And he served as the personal physician to 2 Andalusian caliphs, so prestigious. The medical text of a guy we've met earlier in the course, the Persian Shiite Avicenna, were required reading for Islamic medical students. And so Averroes read them, and he became fascinated by the parallels between his personal interest and career path with that of Avicenna, a person who was professionally a physician, but because of the necessity of studying the natural order, became interested in where that came from, what was beyond the natural order, which led him to philosophy, both Avicenna and Averroes. Averroes took as his personal project to introduce Sunni Andalusian Islam, in Muslims in Spain, to a synthesis of Platonism and Aristotelianism, which Avicenna had put forward, but in a Persian context. Remember that Persian is a different language. Farsi and Arabic are completely different languages. So just because they're all Muslim doesn't mean they all understood the same language. So there were Andalusian Muslims who spoke Arabic, and could not have read Avicenna in the original. So they were dependent on translations, and which of course existed. So Averroes is building on that and doing commentaries, essays essentially about Avicenna's synthesis of pre-Islamic and pre-Christian philosophy, the idealism of Plato with the empiricism of Aristotle. These works, Avicenna's commentaries, followed the caravan route that we followed into university discourse in the West. Follow the trade routes there. Also in Andalusia, there was a substantial Jewish population, and which had an element that was interested in scholarship. One of them was a Jewish rabbi named Moshe ben Maimon, known to the medieval West as Moses Maimonides. Maimonides. He wrote extensive commentaries of his own, but specifically reconciling Aristotle's empiricism with Jewish thought. And again, that followed the trade routes into the West and became part of the library of medieval universities. 2 years later, in 1164, another military religious order came into being in Spain, the Knights of Calatrava, named for their place of coming together with a fortress. Calatrava was the name of a fortress that they liberated from Islam as part of the Reconquista. The first superior, or abbot, or they would say commander, not the general. It's escaping me now. It'll come to me. But the first superior was Ramon Sierra. Their mission was more analogous to the Templars. Unlike the Santiago, which had a hospitaller vocation as well as a military vocation, the Calatrava was strictly military. Their mission was to drive Islam out of Spain. Pope Alexander III declared them a militia of the Cistercian order, hence their white habit. 3 years later, the next medieval university came into being, this one in England in 1167, when King Henry II, so we've met his parents already, Geoffrey Plantagenet and the Empress Matilda. It was a second marriage for both of them, and Henry was one of the offspring. And we've also met Henry's wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who previously was the wife of the French king, Louis VII. And so she marries Henry II, and Henry II is eventually going to be the one who murders Thomas Becket. In 1167, because in the course of a conflict between England and France, which went on for 1,000 years, Henry got mad, and he forbade English subjects from studying at the University of Paris. So, in order to give them an alternative, he sponsored the creation of the Oxford, a university at Oxford's a town, a university in the town of Oxford in 1167, which of course, and it still exists. 3 years later, also in England, St. Thomas Becket was murdered on December 29th, 1170. Okay, I've alluded to him several times. Now we meet him in his chronology, in the church chronology. Thomas of Becket was born of Norman ethnicity in England, in Cheapside, London, neighborhood of London. His family was poor, but Becket possessed tremendous talent, natural talent, which he parlayed into a church education in France, and in 1141 into a position on the staff of a guy we've already met, Theobald, Archbishop of Canterbury. We met him when we were talking about John of Salisbury, who was also on Theobald's staff and became a friend of Becket. Becket was sent to Bologna for further studies, to study law, and in 1154 was made Archdeacon of Canterbury. So he received holy orders. This is major orders now. So remember, at subdeacon and above, they take the commitment to celibacy, so he didn't marry. He was made Archdeacon of Canterbury, a position which gave him income from a benefice and administrative control of some of the material goods and wealth of the church for use in organizing charity. His gifts for administration were then revealed, and that brought him to the attention of the king, Henry II. Henry II was king of England from 1154 to 1189. Henry made Becket his chancellor in 1155, only 1 year after Henry became king. And as we said, this is the same Henry he was a celebrity of his day, married Eleanor of Aquitaine, was father of Richard the Lionhearted, whom we're going to meet in the next crusade, as well as King John I, as well as, no, that was from our previous man. Anyway, yeah. And Henry, as we saw, he was of the House of Anjou, so his dynasty is either called the Angevin dynasty or the Plantagenet dynasty, because his father was Geoffrey Plantagenet. Together, Henry and Becket, who's ecclesially an archdeacon, but temporally in secular order, he was a chancellor, royal chancellor. Together, they set out to reform England. For the first time, England was given a circuit of royal courts with traveling judges appointed by the king to work in areas other than where they were from, to try to ensure impartiality, as well as loyalty to the crown and some measure of immunity from local pressure, because they weren't judging people that lived down the street from them, and they would move on to the next circuit. So the idea of impartial justice to correct one of the feudalism problems. Along with this, some things we take for granted: trial by jury, legal writs. So there's a record of procedures. Became part of English jurisprudence, and therefore one day part of American jurisprudence. Land reform, land law was reformed to allow non-nobles to purchase farms and work as freeholders, meaning they weren't serfs. They did not have titles of nobility, but they also were not serfs. So this became the gentry, the landed gentry of England, and presaged the middle class. I mean, it's too early to say that, in 1154, but it led to the English middle class. These reforms are why England developed a middle class earlier than any of the other countries did. Currency was regulated with the issue of a new penny of standard weight. Now, we think of the penny now as a nuisance. It's worthless. But in a money-poor economy, where precious metals were rare, and they had to be dug up by hand, no machinery. So think of that. Of course, gold is nice and shiny and all, but it's too valuable. So you wouldn't take a gold coin to the market to buy a chicken, because it's too much. Yet, because it was a money-poor economy, it was very difficult and very rare to bring a gold coin to the market and buy a chicken and have someone give you change for the rest of the value of the gold coin. So, but the penny is less value, and it was not made of gold, and so more could be printed. And then you could bring a few pennies to the market and buy a chicken, or buy some other stuff, and then so the issue of change. So then he's putting more money in circulation, which facilitated the move of England away from a barter economy for everyone, not just for the nobles that had access to gold that could steal it from other people. So again, this along with the land reform is why England developed a middle class earlier than the other Western European kingdoms. Henry was on his mother's side was a great grandson of William the Conqueror. So he inherited William's original title of Duke of Normandy, as well as William's title by conquest, King of England. Through his father, Henry II was Count of Anjou. Through conquest, after becoming king, Henry was Duke of Brittany and Gascony. Brittany is on the northwest coast of France. Gascony is on the southwest coast of France, both on the Atlantic coast. Through his marriage to Eleanor, he became Duke Consort of Aquitaine in southern France. And we visited Aquitaine way at the beginning of the course, all through the Merovingian and Carolingian period. This meant that at its height, once he had assembled all of this, that Henry II controlled more of France than the King of France did. And it was the largest personal empire of the day, of the generation, not as big as Charlemagne's had been, but technically not as big as the Holy Roman Empire, but he personally and functionally controlled more territory than the Holy Roman Emperor did. Even though the Holy Roman Empire was bigger, the emperor did not actually personally control all of that. He had vassals that controlled all of it, but it was not personal possession like this. To complete his control of centralizing government, Henry II needed, well, I don't think he needed, but he believed he needed to subjugate the church, to reduce it to a department of state. So, in what he felt was a masterstroke, in 1162, when the Archbishop Theobald of Canterbury died, Henry managed to convince the Pope to have Becket ordained Archbishop of Canterbury while remaining Royal Chancellor. As up to this point, Becket had been on his side. Even though Becket was a churchman, also an archdeacon, his interest and alignment were completely with Henry up to this point in reforming the kingdom. And he thought, okay, Becket's a loyal friend, very talented, and would ensure, as the senior prelate in England, that the church in England would submit to royal control. To everyone's surprise, probably even Becket's, Becket underwent a genuine conversion. Up to this point, he had been what would have been politely called a worldly prelate, meaning a churchman who was just more interested in money and position, not spiritual at all. But at this point, he was a genuine conversion. He gave away his wealth. He funded projects, personal projects to assist the poor, and at least from Henry's perspective, he turned against Henry, in that Becket started to defend the rights of the church, the independence of the church, against encroachment by Henry's centralizing program. This was revealed to everyone at a meeting, a convocation of the barons and bishops, meaning the lords, secular and ecclesiastic, which took place at Northampton, opening on October 1st, 1163. King Henry demanded that clergy convicted of a crime in ecclesiastical courts be stripped of their clerical rank, returned to the lay state, and handed over to the secular royal courts for punishment. And remember, justice is very primitive here, so punishment is usually corporal punishment. You mean some pain inflicted on the body. It could be flogging or mutilation. Mutilation was part of the judicial system of the day, cutting off an ear, ripping out a tongue, cutting off a hand, or up to capital punishment, beheading, hanging. Now, prior to so a church, when church and state were not separate the way we think of as Americans, a person in holy orders is ordained, and so they were considered like a sacred object. So just like it was a more serious offense to break a blessed object than it was just to break, some clay cup somewhere. So also to physically assault an ordained person was sacrilege, as that person was set apart for sacred use. So there were many punishments that could not be inflicted on them. And so Henry said, okay, if a cleric, and remember, this is minor orders and major orders, so there would be a larger population than just who we think of today as deacons, priests, and bishops. If they were convicted of a crime in ecclesiastical courts, the ecclesiastical courts would impose some kind of punishment. But from Henry's perspective, it was too lenient, because it would not include corporal punishment, and certainly would not include execution. So he wanted the church in England to agree, if they're convicted of a crime, then they will be expelled from the clerical state, and therefore therefore corporal punishment would no longer be considered the sin of sacrilege. And that's what he wanted. And to Henry's dismay, Becket refused to accept this. And all the bishops but one agreed with Becket. So from Henry's perspective, they turned against him. Henry was enraged. He felt betrayed. And he had all the properties. He fired Becket, of course, from his position as chancellor, but then also stole all of his property, which was not really his. It was fiduciary in the benefices for the Archdiocese of Canterbury. But Henry stole them all. In January of 1164, Henry summoned, again, another convocation, nobles and ecclesiastics, to another council. This one met at Clarendon. There he demanded that all bishops and abbots sign the Constitution of Clarendon, which, among other things, included the following: royal courts, meaning secular courts, rather than church courts, should have jurisdiction over all cases involving land and income, including all cases involving land and income for the church. And this would include inheritance. So another thing to keep in mind that, as Americans is incomprehensible to us. So now your birth certificate, your marriage license, your death certificate, all that comes from the government, from the state, from the Bureau of Vital Statistics. But there was no such bureau in the medieval world. The church kept all those records. So your vital statistics would be your baptismal certificate, the sacramental record of your marriage if you got married, and finally your burial. All that would be handled by the church, which included marriage. Remember, then that leads to inheritance. So disputed inheritance would be handled by church courts. And of course, inheritance, that would include land, property. So Henry wants to take all that away, all that away from the church and centralize it in secular courts, royal secular courts. Second, royal courts, secular courts, would try clerics after being convicted of a crime by church courts. So he's just repeating what he tried at Northampton in the previous year. No cleric, no ordained person, remember that's from tonsure all the way up to bishop, no ordained person could leave England without permission of the king. Now that one was not as strange as it might sound, because these are all monarchies, and monarchies are not free societies. So, again, we take freedom of movement for granted. I can go from Louisiana to Mississippi and just drive on the interstate, but that cannot be taken for granted. So here we have a nucleus of the idea of a passport. That if an ordained person left the country with, they didn't call it a passport, but without permission of the king, then that person was considered an outlaw, meaning outside of the law. And if the person tried to return to England, would be treated as a criminal, a person as outside the law. So control, centralized, all control. Fourth, no royal official and no nobleman could be excommunicated without the king's permission. No English subject was permitted to appeal to the Pope directly. If they had a case to go to the Pope, they had to have the king's permission before forwarding it to the Pope. So this could even be a dispute, say over property between the bishop of a diocese and the abbot of a monastery. And, then going up the chain in church courts, then that would be, go to the Pope. Or certainly if it was between two bishops. But Henry said, no, you cannot do that without going through me first. Sixth, the king, the monarch, was to hold all land and revenue that were allotted to a diocese when that diocese became vacant. So when the bishop died or was transferred, then the king would hold the land and collect the revenue until the position was replaced, but specifically replaced by a bishop who was acceptable to the king. So this is not only theft, stealing church money, but also, giving himself veto power over the high-ranking clergy, over the bishops and abbots. There were some other stipulations, but you get the point. It's centralizing royal control. Now, of course, Becket could not agree to this. Oh, well, he could have, but it would, in that context, it would have been betraying the church. Henry still mad, still feeling personally betrayed. To him, this is not just opposition. He had considered Becket a friend, a personal friend, not just an ally. So this is a real, that explains the emotion behind this. So Henry then retaliates, demanding an account of Becket's term as chancellor when he worked for Henry as chancellor, accusing him of graft, corruption, and embezzlement. Becket saw where this was going. So Henry would hear these cases, since it was from his time as secular chancellor, it would be the royal courts that would hear this case. And Becket, was under no illusions that he was going to get a fair trial. So he fled. He fled England before being arrested for this. He fled on November 2nd, 1164. He was given sanctuary by Louis VII, the King of France, the Crusader that we met already in the Second Crusade. He stayed in France Becket stayed in France while he appealed to Pope Alexander III, who conveniently was also living in France, also in exile because of the Roman Commune, and supported the Senate of the Commune in Rome, supported by Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor, because Pope Alexander wouldn't do what he wanted, wouldn't give in to him, who was also trying to centralize authority at the expense of the church. And remember that Barbarossa had also supported it. There was an anti-pope in control in Rome. So Alexander was also in France, also given refuge by Louis VII. And Louis was happy to give refuge to Becket. He hated Henry because his wife Eleanor left him to marry Henry II. It's just, this is really, it's a medieval soap opera. Now, Pope Alexander, of course, could never agree to the Constitution of Clarendon, but he also did not want to drive a man as powerful as Henry II against the church to the extent that Henry might ally with Barbarossa. And normally the English and the Germans would not be natural allies in the 12th century, but if they were both mad at the Pope for different reasons, or for similar reasons, then they might ally against the church. So, initially the Pope urged some kind of compromise. Now, Becket knew this would never work because he knew Henry's personality. So Becket remained in exile in France for 6 years. On November 30th, 1170, a settlement was reached that everyone pretended was a compromise, whereby Henry would drop his demands in the Constitution of Clarendon, and Becket would lift the excommunications he pronounced against Henry's followers, who had been implementing the Council of Clarendon during Becket's absence. 1 month later, it was in the next month, but just a few days later, on December 2nd, 1170, Henry, who was in Normandy, which is in France, but he's Duke of Normandy, so that's not that unusual, learned that when Becket returned home to Canterbury, that he received a wildly enthusiastic reception. Not ticker-tape, but, like that kind of, the applause, the cheers, everybody's celebrating, the welcome of a hero. It was at this point that his rage took over, and he's supposed to have screamed, "Will no one rid me of this low-born priest?" After which 4 of Henry's knights who heard this took ship for England. On December 29th, 1170, they found Becket in a chapel of his cathedral in Canterbury and murdered him. Becket was immediately recognized as a martyr and officially canonized by Pope Alexander III 3 years later on February 21st, 1173. At the time, that was the fastest canonization, 3 years. In the next century, St. Francis would beat him, would be a shorter time. Francis was canonized only 2 years after his death. Back in Italy, fortuitously for the church, Barbarossa did not confine his despotism to the church. He invaded Italy 4 times up to this point. It would eventually be 5, but 4 times up to this point, imposing imperial tyranny by force on city-states in Italy, which had for generations come to enjoy a large measure of de facto internal autonomy during the previous generations of no government in the peninsula. Resentment at this, the imperial despotism prompted the formation of a Guelph anti-imperial alliance called the League of Verona, which was formed in 1164. Pope Alexander, later, 3 years later, joined it and brought many other cities with him. So it expanded and it was renamed the Lombard League. And that agreement forming the League as an anti-imperial alliance came into being on December 1st, 1167. That provoked Barbarossa's fifth invasion of Italy, and that proved to be his undoing. The Lombard League tactically, militarily outmaneuvered him, and in practical terms, they outnumbered him, outnumbered the number of troops he was able to cross the Alps with. They cornered him 50 miles north of Milan at the Battle of Legnano on May 29th, 1176, and defeated him. Now, it was a tactical defeat, not strategic, because Barbarossa did survive and he was able to withdraw with some of his troops. But the League commanded the field, so they won the day. Then, without to assert military domination over Rome, because he lost too many troops, the anti-papacy that he had been supporting collapsed, which allowed Pope Alexander III to return to Rome and hold the Third Lateran Council, which I will discuss shortly. Nevertheless, soon after the close, soon after this, after he was able to return and did the Lateran Council, the Roman Republic, the Senate of the Commune of the Roman Commune, forced Alexander III to leave the city again, and he was never able to re-enter. And then some nobles, in the Commune set up yet another antipope. By the judicious use of money, however, Alexander III captured this antipope, had this guy captured, and he was deposed in 1180. In 1181, Alexander III excommunicated the King of Scotland and put him under an interdict, because this King of Scotland was also pursuing what we'll call the Clarendon Initiative, trying to essentially steal from the church. And Alexander died with all of this hanging the same year. He died on August 30th, 1181. Germany was not the only place in which church and state came into conflict. Even after the Concordat of Worms settled the lay investiture controversy. As we see, it happened in England. And similar things were happening elsewhere, but we don't have time to talk about everything. So we'll move to the Third Lateran Council in 1179. Was made possible for reasons we already covered, because Alexander was able to temporarily return to Rome. While he was in Rome, Alexander made an alliance with the de Hauteville's, the Normans in southern Italy and Sicily. And they helped him. They were part of the League, even though they were not in Lombardy. They were part of the Lombard League. And that's why I think the League was able to defeat Barbarossa. And so for the first time in 20 years, Pope Alexander was able to enter Rome. And the Third Lateran Council was attended by 302 voting prelates, mostly bishops, but also some abbots could vote. But you have to multiply that, because all these people came with staff, so they're probably over 1,000 people, but 302 voting. So some background issues. Let's see. Excuse me for a moment. Sorry about that. Okay, so some background issues to the Third Lateran Council, which are some of which are also going to form the background for the Third Crusade. By the time the Third Lateran Council met in the year 1179, two of what would eventually be the eight or nine, depending on how you count them, crusades had been waged. The first culminating in 1099, the second in 1149. The Latin kingdom in the Holy Land, called the Outremer, the land over the sea, across the sea, was established. Along with it, the military religious orders grew in power and influence. This allowed the sins of pride and greed to seep in and corrupt the idealism of their original founders. Because of the danger of traveling to the Holy Land, it was imprudent for pilgrims to bring all of their money on such a journey, or to carry it with them, because one bandit, and you lose everything. So once the military orders became well established, they pioneered the practice of international banking, initially as a service to pilgrims going to the Holy Land, and then expanded to other travelers, and then expanded to just anybody because it was a convenience. So to put this in, for example, say somebody in London decides he wants to go to the Holy Land. Now that could be a 3-year trip, to walk to the Holy Land, stay there sometime, and then walk back. Or maybe he was just going to move to the Holy Land. Maybe he was just going to retire and just spend the rest of his life there in the Holy Land. So if he were to do this, if he were to liquidate all of his holdings into, a big bag of gold, well, doesn't want to carry that all the way to the Holy Land, but he still needs access to it. So what he could do is he could deposit the whole bag of gold with a commandery of the Templars or the Hospitallers in London. And then they would give him a record of how much he had. Now, of the bag of gold, he might just take 1 or 2 coins with him. And if he did that, then all these commanderies, they communicated with each other. So the next time they sent a group to that he could travel with them, so he'd have protection. And then and hospitality at their commanderies along the way. And so he could travel from London all the way to the Holy Land as safely. I mean, nothing's completely, but I mean, given all the givens, given the time, that was about as safe as you could get. You're traveling with the most highly trained fighting men in the Christian world. You're sleeping in their guest houses, and you can draw down a little of your money as you go along. And they all had houses in the Holy Land, so you could do the same thing. Same thing there. The same process could be done on the return trip if he chose to return. So initially, this was a service developed for pilgrims, but there were obvious advantages because the same risks of travel and bandits applied to merchants, to diplomats, to anyone really who was traveling. And so it became a service sought by merchants and craftsmen and guilds and even nobles who were going on journeys, even if they did not want to go all the way to the Holy Land. So say, somebody in London was a merchant and he wanted to go do business with Burgundy in eastern France. Well, it could be the same thing. Is that by this time, as these orders developed, they would have commanderies all along the way. Their commandery is their version of a monastery. So it could do the same thing there, and it would facilitate trade and business. The combination of their military might with the financial independence that this gave the military orders standing or leverage to demand special treatment from local nobles, then from kings, and finally even from the Holy See. An example was they obtained for the chapels of the military orders exemption from interdicts placed on local territories. An interdict was a punishment in which sacraments could not be celebrated within that given territory. Say the County of Anjou. If they were placed under interdict, then no sacraments could take place there. No baptisms, masses, weddings, funerals. But these orders got a special papal exemption. So if Anjou was placed under an interdict, sacraments could still take place in the chapels of their commanderies. And so locals who supported them would, of course, be allowed to go to Mass at there. And if someone died, well, then most of the members of these orders were lay brothers, but they all had some priest to do Mass and confessions. Well, then one of their priests would do the funeral. So it was a way to get around the interdict. As time passed, especially in the Holy Land, these order chapels would routinely offer sacraments not only to travelers and pilgrims, but also offered to locals. And not only during interdicts, but just regular. So they would form rival parishes, in a sense. They would not canonically be parishes, but you'd have people who normally would go to the parish church and support that, but instead they prefer to go to Mass with the knights, and then they support the knights. So it's a lot of it's money. I mean, I hate to say, but if you dig deep enough in 90% of the problems of the human race, somehow you're going to find money in there. So this developed into just good old-fashioned disobedience that not only undermined the Pope's authority, but also local bishops, and in terms of the Holy Land, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, who had endless problems trying to curb the treatment of the local population by Norman knights who were members of the order, these orders. And so this is evidence that these orders, these military orders, had absorbed the ecclesiology of autocephaly. So ecclesiology is theology of the church. Autocephaly is a theology, you remember from the patristics course, or those of you who didn't take it, it developed in the East. So autocephaly, it comes from two Greek words. Auto means self. Cephala means head. So self-headed, self-head. So it's independence. It's the idea that these religious orders are autonomous, internally independent, and do not need to recognize a higher authority in terms of jurisdiction. And they were willing they would recognize the Pope, bishops, as figureheads, but not actually having any control over them and not being bound to obedience to them. Okay, another problem as background to the Third Lateran Council is a continuation of one that we've seen even from the last year's course, and that is dualism. In this period, it keeps reinventing itself. So this is now we meet the Cathar movement. Cathar. Cathar movement or ism or Catharism. Medieval Cathars, that movement was a synthesis of iconoclasm, which we've already met, with Manichaean dualism, which we've already met, with anti-clericalism, which we've already met, that we traced from the Paulicians in the East to the Bogomils in Bulgaria. That's where we left it off. Next, and we also met Arnold de Brescia. So next, it makes its way into France, and that is the Cathar movement. Cathar comes from a Greek word, because this comes from the East. So catharsis in Greek, spelled with a K, not a C, means to be cleansed. So the Cathars were the clean ones, the pure ones. I think of this as potato sack piety. So this would be kind of an inverted pride, a false pride. So like, I am so much holier than all of you that I can live just wearing a potato sack and sackcloth. I'm just that holy. And when I pray, you might pray sitting down or pray on your knees, but I am so holy, so much holier than you, that I pray in the cruciform position, that I lay before the Blessed Sacrament, in the form of a cross. So it's that kind of false humility, which is just, it's an elitism and pride, very dangerous pride, but masquerading as humility and simplicity. This is also, as in the next century, the Cathar movement in France would be known as Albigensianism, because of an association of a Cathar base with the city of Albi, A-L-B-I, in southern France. But that's in the next century. Its doctrine, the Cathar doctrine, is found summarized, conveniently for us, in the Book of the Two Principles. So again, dualism. So to summarize, I'm not going to read from it because it's heretical, but because it's going to affect church history and change church history in some ways, we at least have to summarize. And note, please, seminarians, note these are heresies, okay? So don't always hesitate to summarize heresies, but they're still with us. So, in terms of doctrine, they were Manichaean dualists. So they loathed, hated, felt disgust at all things material, including human flesh, regarding it as ontologically tainted. Ontos is being, so that by the nature of being material, it was tainted and flawed and sinful. Therefore, they denied the incarnation of Christ. I mean, they denied the humanity of Christ. They denied the Trinity. They denied the bodily resurrection. They deny the sacraments, of course, because all the sacraments have a material component, especially the Eucharist. So, of course, they deny transubstantiation. Also rejected holy orders and matrimony, because matrimony is the way that you bring more bodies into the world, and bodies are filthy and dirty, and so that's bad. They saw, so if God God is all good, so he couldn't create this evil material stuff, and where did it come from? They saw the material world as created by Satan to imprison souls in bodies of flesh as prisons for the soul, in order to keep the soul from reaching salvation in heaven. And so the only way is to escape. You have to escape the physical world in order to be saved. They also regarded the Old Testament, the God of the Old Testament. Whenever the Old Testament refers to God, they don't see that as God, as the Christian God. They see that as Satan, masquerading as God. The true God for the Cathars was the God of love, revealed in not even all the New Testament. They didn't like all the New Testament, but revealed in parts of the New Testament. This God of love was a God of pure spirit, who would welcome the souls of those that achieved enlightenment and were able to completely detach from the material world. But because Satan's grip is so strong, and the emotions and the flesh he imprisoned us within is so tempting, it would take many lifetimes to reach the point of final detachment, final separation, that would bring the soul into the presence of God. So they had the reincarnation, the cyclical reincarnation idea. In terms of ecclesiology, theology of church, they rejected holy orders, marriage, and sacraments, so of course they rejected the hierarchical structure of the Catholic Church. But not all hierarchy, because they had a hierarchy, but their hierarchy was good, you see. But the church's hierarchy is bad. Yeah. So at the top of their hierarchy were the perfecti, the perfect. Their perfecti would live celibate lives, externally of great austerity, the fasting and the wearing the sackcloth, and it was believed that those who lived that way, the fact that they could live that way, meant that in previous lives, that they were in the final cycle of their lives, that in previous lives they had divested themselves of more and more attachments to the world, to the emotions, to the flesh. And so now that they were able to live that way, that was external proof that they had, in fact, they were in their last cycle. And so when they died, they were going to go, they would not be forced into another reincarnation. When the perfecti became seriously ill, the Cathars practiced euthanasia on them through starvation and dehydration in order to hasten the liberation of their souls from their flesh prison. The rest of the Cathars were the credentes, were just the believers, those who believe. They lived fairly normal lives. They would practice mild forms of asceticism, understanding that they would have to exist for many more cycles before arriving at the final level of the perfecti, where they too could be euthanized. The Cathars had no notion of hell or purgatory. For them, the closest thing to hell was this world, because it was created by Satan. It was Satan's kingdom. This world also served the function of purgatory, since souls in their mind were reincarnated into bodies over and over and over again until liberation was achieved. Their ideal was that there would be no marriage and no reproductive intercourse, because that only aided Satan in producing more bodies that would become more prisons for more souls. That very creation of human beings, the act of reproduction, was in their view the work of Satan. They believe, because Satan did not create the soul. See, they believe the souls existed already as immaterial entities. And so it's only when we create a new body that Satan can grab a soul and stick it in the body and trap it. The perfecti were few in number, but the movement spread among many who were content to be associated with them as credentes. Was also an anti-authoritarian movement, except for their own authority. You see, their own authority is good and righteous and holy, but all other authority is bad. Got that? You like that? So it's anti-authoritarian, deeming both the ecclesiastical and the secular hierarchies as mere phantoms of the world, creations of Satan. As their numbers grew, and recruitment, and here we have to, divulge, or at least accept that recruitment was facilitated in part by problems within the church, the feudalism problems. As so many, sons and daughters, younger sons and daughters, were sent into the church without a genuine vocation, or they were married off to total strangers for the good of their family, again, without any kind of reference to what they wanted or what they were capable of. So you had many cases where they just betrayed the sacraments, betrayed their states of life. And that had effect for the effectiveness, that had a deleterious diminution in the effectiveness of the church. And so that fueled, but whereas you have these perfecti, they're just wearing sackcloth, so they're much holier. Whereas you have the bishop, who's the younger son of a duke, well, he's living in opulence and splendor. So which one externally looks to be holier? So that we can't deny that did fuel their recruiting. All right, so this was developed. It would be addressed throughout the Middle Ages in a number of councils. By Lateran III, it was known to exist, and they couldn't foresee how bad it would get, but it did have to be addressed. So with all that background, we move to Council number 11, which is the Third Lateran Council, met from March 5th through March 19th, 1179. It produced 27 canons. Canon 1 affected papal elections, that it stipulated that a person required 2/3 of the votes of the cardinals in order to be elected pope, not just a simple majority, but 2/3 vote. Skipping down, Canon 3. We declare that no one should be chosen bishop until he has reached the age of 30, been born in a lawful wedlock, and also is shown to be worthy by his life and his learning. Further, with regard to the inferior ministries, For instance, that of dean or archdeacon, and others which have the cura animorum, the care of souls. Let no one at all receive them, or even the rule of parish churches, unless he has already reached his 25th year of age, and can be approved for his learning and character. So this is an attempt to address some of the feudalism problems. So a duke might put his younger son, age 5, as abbot of a monastery or bishop of a diocese, just to collect the revenue from the fiefs. So it has these age stipulation, but also worthy life and learning. So some evidence that the person actually assents to an ecclesiastical life. The fact that councils are just going to keep repeating this means that it was being ignored. Skipping down, Canon 6. We lay down by this present decree that prelates should not pass sentence of suspension or excommunication without a previous canonical warning, unless the fault is such that by its nature it incurs the penalty of excommunication. Okay, canonical warning means in writing, because everything in canon, like if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And now they even have protocol numbers, so every official document is numbered. In this period, it would mean the seal, the bishop of either the seal of either the bishop, the abbot, or the pope. So it'd be an official warning that you, by whatever behavior, you have placed your soul in danger of being excluded from the sacramental life of the church. And this is what is required to remediate that. Now, the last thing, seminarians, that's referring to the latae sententiae, excommunication, that there are some actions which by their nature automatically exclude one from communion with the church, that it does not require a specific sentence. So apostasy, sacrilege, idolatry, blasphemy, they're a whole list of them. That would automatically do it. Okay, Canon 7. We severely forbid that anything be demanded for the enthronement of ecclesiastical persons or the institution of priests, for burying the dead, as well as for blessing marriages or for any other sacrament. Okay, so this is addressing the stipend issue. So we forbid that anything be demanded for burying the dead, blessing marriages, or for any other sacrament. So a stipend can be given, and it can be accepted, but a clergy cannot say, well, if you can't afford it, I'm not going to baptize you. Yeah. Now, this is distinct from church rental, which, because some churches charge more than others, and that's a whole other issue. So this isn't addressing that. So this is just stipends can be offered, stipends can be received for the sacraments, but the church cannot exclude someone from the sacraments because they cannot pay. Skipping down to Canon 9, this addresses the autocephaly issue I mentioned with the military orders. Now we have learned from the strongly worded complaints of our brethren and fellow bishops that the Templars and Hospitallars and other professed religious, exceeding the privileges granted them by the Apostolic See, have often disregarded episcopal authority, causing scandal to the people of God and grave danger to souls. We absolutely forbid that these orders and all other religious should receive churches or tithes from the hands of lay persons. We declare that those who are excommunicated or interdicted by name must be avoided by all, and all others according to the sentence of the bishop. If they do not observe this decree, let the churches in which they dare so to act be placed under an interdict, and let what they do be considered void. So remember the rule of thumb. Anytime a law is made, it means that somebody was doing that. So it had to be corrected. So we already mentioned about the Templars and Hospitallars ignoring authority. These other issues tells us that the Templars and Hospitallers were receiving tithes and churches from the hands of laymen, so the investing, investiture, which had already been condemned. And we see that those who were excommunicated or interdicted were getting around it by receiving sacraments in the chapels of those. So the council's forbidding that too. Canon 11, here again, how many times have we visited this? Clergy in holy orders, who in open concubinage keep their mistresses in their houses, should either be cast out, should either cast them out, or live continently, or be deprived of ecclesiastical office and benefice. Let all who are found guilty of unnatural vice, and since this is a family-friendly channel, I'm not going to define what that is, but think about it, you'll figure it out. That unnatural vice for which the wrath of God came down upon the sons of disobedience and destroyed the 5 cities with fire, that's referring to Sodom and Gomorrah from the book of Genesis. If they are clergy, they be expelled from the clergy or confined in monasteries to do penance. If they are laymen, they are to incur excommunication and be completely separated from the society of the faithful. Canon 12, clergy in the sub-diaconate and above, and also those in minor orders. So I don't know why they don't have to say those in all orders, because that, but anyway, if they are supported by ecclesiastical revenues, should not presume to become advocates in legal matters before a secular judge, unless they happen to be defending their own case or that of the church, or acting on behalf of the helpless who cannot conduct their own cases. Canon 13. When it is necessary to entrust a church or ecclesiastical ministry to anyone, the person sought for this office should be of such a kind that he is able to reside in the place and exercise his care for it himself. It's another feudalism problem. So the cura animorum means care of souls. So not all benefices, not all fiefs, not all, that provided revenue also included care of souls, but some of them did. So if the benefice was a parish, and that parish had fiefs, and the revenue would come from the fiefs, but it also had care of souls because there was a parish there, and so the serfs on those fiefs would come to the parish for sacraments. Then, to address the feudalism problem, it's saying that a person who receives this has to reside in the place and actually has to care for the souls. Whereas, the feudalism problem would be that the family arranged this for, a son who just really didn't care. He received orders because they told him to, and he received the benefice and the revenue, but just didn't do the sacraments, didn't care for the souls. So this is trying to address that. Not the first or the last time, which indicates that the problem continued. Canon 14, this again, investiture again. Priests or clerics who receive the charge of a church from the hands of lay persons without the authority of their own bishop are to be deprived of communion, and if they persist, they are to be deposed from the ecclesiastical ministry and from holy orders. Skipping down, Canon 18. In every cathedral church, a magister, a master, is to be assigned some proper benefice so that he may teach the clerics of that church and the poor scholars. Thus the needs of the teacher are supplied and the way to knowledge opened for learners. So that a benefice is a source of revenue in the medieval. So they didn't pass the basket in the medieval world. So the way the church was funded, the way everything else was funded, was through these benefices, which many of them were fiefs. So this is saying that every cathedral should have at least one master. It doesn't stipulate whether he has to be in orders or a layman, just a master, that he have a benefice to support him, so that he could teach students who were not able to pay, to poor scholars. So it's like not public education, but it's like a free education. Canon 12. Now this is fascinating, considering the year 1179. We forbid those abominable jousts and fairs, which are commonly called tournaments, in which knights come together by agreement and rashly engage in showing off their physical prowess and daring, and which often result in human deaths and danger to souls. If any of them dies on these occasions, although forgiveness is not to be denied him if he requests it, he is to be deprived of a church burial. Canon 23. Lepers. Now, remember, Hansen's disease was not diagnosed until the 19th century. Hansen was a Scandinavian physician. It's the name of a guy. So what they refer to as lepers was a broader category than those who just suffered from Hansen's disease. Many of them, no doubt, did have Hansen's disease, but anyone with a severe skin, thing, that they would just, okay, those are lepers. So, Canon 23, lepers. Wherever so many are gathered together under a common way of life, that they are able to establish a church for themselves with a cemetery and rejoice in their own priest. So if a leper colony, in other words, if they are enough of them to make a colony, and they are able to support a church and a cemetery for themselves, that the church is supposed to supply them a priest. Now, presumably, it would be a priest who also has leprosy, but, it doesn't say that. So it could be that they would assign a priest who does not have the disease to go minister to them. And remember, they didn't know how the disease was spread, so that's... Canon 24. Cruel avarice has so seized the hearts of some that though they glory in the name of Christian, they provide the Saracens with arms and wood for helmets, and become their equals or even their superiors in wickedness, and supply them with arms to attack Christians. There are even some who for gain act as captains or pilots in galleys or Saracen pirate vessels. Therefore, we declare that such persons should be cut off from the communion of the church and be excommunicated for their wickedness. That Catholic princes and civil magistrates should confiscate their possessions, and that if they are captured, they should become the slaves of the captors. It's pretty astonishing coming from a church council. Canon 25. We declare that notorious usurers should not be admitted to communion or receive Christian burial if they die in this sin. Now, it's interesting. Not just usurers, meaning those who charge interest, but notorious usurers. It doesn't define what notorious is. Canon 26. Jews and Saracens, or Muslims and Saracens, so Jews and Muslims, are not to be allowed to have Christian servants in their houses, either under pretense of nourishing their children or for service or any other reason. Canon 27. Now this gets to the dualism. Since in Gascony and the region of Albi and Toulouse and in other places, the loathsome heresy of those whom some call the pure, the Cathars, others the Patarines, others the Publicani, we forbid, under pain of anathema, that anyone should keep or support them. If anyone dies in this sin, then neither under cover of our privileges granted to anyone, nor for any other reason, is Mass to be offered for them, or are they to receive burial among Christians. So that the Cathars, and yet another condemnation of the dualism. I'll skip that. Okay, that's enough. Despite the success of the council, as we said, the Roman Republic, the Commune, the Senate of the Commune rose again against the papacy, forcing Alexander to leave the city on September 29th, 1179. He was never able to return. He died at Civita Castellana on August 30th, 1181. 2 days after the death of Alexander, the Cardinal Bishop of Ostia, who was also Dean of the College of Cardinals, he was the oldest cardinal, accepted election as the 171st Pope, taking the papal name Lucius III, reigning for 4 years. Born in Lucca, in Tuscany, around the year 1097, baptized Ubaldo of the house of Alusignoli. Pope Innocent II admitted him to the College of Cardinals in December of 1138 as a cardinal deacon of San Adriano, then promoted him to cardinal priest of Santo Presende in 1141. Pope Hadrian appointed him cardinal bishop of Ostia, which was the port of Rome, in 1158, and then the members of the college elected him as dean. He was well known, highly respected at the time of his election. This enabled a truce with the Ghibelline Roman commune long enough for him to be consecrated properly, but he could not give in to their demand for control over church lands. And they modified their demand such that the commune, would take over church land, but would give 1/10 of the revenue in support to the church. Threats of violence he refused, so threats of violence forced him to leave the city like his predecessors in March of 1182. He moved to Velletri, then to Anagni, then to Verona. Barbarossa, who's still around, Frederick I, the Holy Roman Emperor, used this period of weakness to attempt to pressure Lucius III to accept the German bishops appointed by his anti-popes during the reign of previous popes. Now, despite his itinerant status, Pope Lucius refused to concede that point, and further refused to crown Barbarossa's chosen heir designate, Heinrich, who would end up being Heinrich VI, until all of this was resolved according to canon law. His reign, Pope Lucius's reign, also witnessed another ongoing mitosis. So all these heresies, they undergo mitosis just continually. They just all make up new stuff of a dualist heresy, which introduces us to Peter Waldo and the Waldensian heresy. In 1177, a wealthy merchant in the French city of Lyon underwent a conversion experience. The details have not been preserved, but the experience was profound and lifelong. His name is known by many forms. Pierre Vaudet in the French. That's Pierre, then the last name, Vaudes, or anglicized as Peter Waldo, Waldo. The form his conversion took was discussed with the wealth of his family, possibly because it had been obtained immorally. Now, that is not known. That's an inference. But it is known that he had connections within the clerical, ecclesiastical world of Lyon, because in the year 1180, he paid them to translate the Bible from Latin, from the Vulgate Latin, into the Languedoc dialect used in southern France. It is reasonable to surmise that it is from them, from the clergy in Lyon, that he learned of the anti-clerical teachings of the Bogomils. The old lure of Manichaean dualism entered his mind at a vulnerable state when he was feeling alienated from his family or feeling guilty, embarrassed by his family. This blended with the ever-present temptation to the sin of pride. The result of that synthesis was the creation of a new heretical sect. The name he gave it was the Poor Men of Lyon. The poor man. But it eventually came to bear his name, the Valdensians. The particular way in which Peter Waldo preached the Manichaean hatred of the material was self-imposed poverty, exclusively lay ministry, including women, men and women, because ordained priesthood was not necessary, you see, and using the Bible in the vernacular language, meaning the spoken language of the people. German for the Germans, Languedoc for southern France, French in northern France, Langue d'Huile in northern France, but not Latin, because that was the magic language of the clerical elite. Therefore, it's bad. You see. Waldo was excommunicated in 1184 for these heresies. It's indicative of the widespread belief that the church needed some kind of reform, that Peter Waldo was able to find refuge and protection despite his status as an excommunicate. The Count of Savoy, in the Piedmont region of northwest Italy, gave Waldo protection. It was from this base that the Valdensian version of Manichaean dualism made its way south into Italy. In November of 1184, Pope Lucius III held a synod at Verona, at which the ongoing eruptions of dualism were condemned. Cathars, Aldensians of Arnold of Brescia, and Valdensians. The next year, in 1185, preparations began for the Third Crusade in answer to the appeals of King Baudouin IV, or Baldwin IV, of Jerusalem. Before these preparations for the crusade were completed, Pope Lucius III died at Verona, never was able to make it back to Rome, on November 25th, 1185. So, let me see, where are we? Okay, yeah, okay. On the day of Lucius III's death, the cardinal priest of San Lorenzo, who was also Archbishop of Milan, accepted election as Pope 172, taking the papal name Urban III. He reigned for 1 year and 11 months. Born in Cuggiono in 1120, baptized Umberto, son of Guala, of the house of Crivelli. He was known to have 4 brothers, at least, and he was uncle of a future pope, Celestine IV. Studied at Bologna and entered papal service. Now, in the lead up to the Third Crusade, we have to acquaint ourselves with Constance, a lady named Constance I of the House of de Hauteville. She was the posthumous daughter of a guy we've already met, Roger II, the Norman king of Sicily. Roger's third marriage took place in 1151. He married Beatrice of Rethel. She was a grand niece of King Baudouin II of Jerusalem. They had 1 daughter, Constance. She was born after her father died, shortly after her father died, on November 2nd, 1154. Later, she was married Emperor, the German Emperor Heinrich VI, Henry VI, in 1186. They married at the Basilica of St. Ambrose in Milan. She would later serve as the Queen of Sicily. Her son, Frederick II, inherited both the Hohenstaufen German possessions as well as the Norman de Hauteville possessions in Naples and Sicily. Okay. Roger died at Palermo on November 26, 1154. He was buried in the Cathedral of Palermo He was succeeded by his fourth son from a previous marriage, William, who became King William I, also known in Italian history as William the Bad, Lumalo. He was king of Sicily from 1154 until his own death in 1166. When he died, he was followed by William II, who's called in Italian history William the Good. He was king of Sicily from 1166 to 1189. He was a champion of the papacy, and he was part of the Lombard League, defying Barbarossa, which we've already discussed. After his death, the Norman nobles supported not Constance, who was a legitimate daughter of Roger II, but instead supported a man who was illegitimate by birth, but he was a man, and he did have de Hauteville blood. He was an illegitimate cousin of the previous William. This guy's name was Tancred, Tancred. He was the Count of Lecce, Lecce. Let's see, we're going to meet this guy again. All right. No, I do have to mention this because Richard the Lionhearted is going to get involved in all this. No, let's skip that. Is that all right? No, I'm going to get to that later. All right, so I skipped that. William III was a scion of the de Hauteville dynasty. He was the last Norman king of Sicily. He reigned briefly for 10 months in 1194. He was overthrown by Constance and her husband, the Emperor Heinrich VI. In August of 1194, Heinrich marched against Sicily and conquered it, essentially. And when Palermo fell on November 20th, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. Let's see, I'm going to have to end because that was a call, something I have to do. So we will pause here and we'll pick up with the lead up to the Third Crusade. Anyway, I got to go. So we're going to stop now. We'll pick up with the Third Crusade. I'll lead up to it next time. The next session. So for the moment, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.